agencies, and not to forget grooming gangs operating in Scotland that the SNP Scottish Government want to believe are not a problem, instead are sticking their heads in the sand. So will the First Minister finally commit to backing my Prevention of Domestic Abuse Scotland bill, which will better monitor perpetrators and prevent potential victims from becoming victims in the first place? And will he do the right thing and agree to the grooming gangs inquiry so we can uncover the true scale of abuse of women and girls that are occurring in Scotland?
First Minister.
President Officer, there are many issues raised by Pam Gosal, so I would be grateful if I could give very serious issues to which I would like to give substantial answers. First thing I want to say is I want to welcome the groups that are here and commend them for their courage and commemorate the 46 women who have been killed by men. Every single woman that is killed by a man in our society is totally unacceptable as a crime, and it appalls all of us, regardless of our politics. The second point I want to raise is in relation to the question of the bill that Pam Gosal has brought forward. The Government will engage constructively on this bill. We have already legislated through different measures. The Criminal Justice Modernisation and Abusive Domestic Behaviour Review Scotland Act is one example, and the previous domestic abuse legislation to strengthen the legislative position so that there is absolutely no tolerance of domestic violence in our society. Now, on the question of grooming gangs, this is a very complex issue to which the Government is giving very detailed consideration. On Monday, along with the Justice and Education Secretaries and the Minister for Children and Young People, I was briefed by Police Scotland and by the National Childhood Sexual Exploitation Group about the prevalence of these issues in Scotland. Yesterday, the National Group met to review these issues, and I've personally conducted a discussion with Professor Alexis Jay on these issues. Now, I hope all of these details that I've put on the record today will give Pam Gosal and colleagues in Parliament the confidence and the assurance that the Government is looking in detail at all of these questions. Nobody is putting their head in the sand. This has been looked at in detail because there are complexities about the interaction on the call that has been made for us on this issue with the child abuse inquiry that we have already statutorily established. So there are no straightforward ways through this issue. But I assure Parliament that the Government is giving every serious consideration to this important issue.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Prevention of male violence in all its forms is preferable, both morally and practically. This session we have an opportunity to legislate to tackle male demand for prostitution and really disrupt a trade in women and girls that's both a cause and a consequence of violence. Does the First Minister agree that we must do all we can to ensure this legislation is fit for purpose and passes so that we can finally make good on a policy position that we've held for decades? That prostitution is violence against women, and we will not accept the harm it causes for a second longer.
First Minister.
President Officer, as the Victims Minister made clear to the Justice Committee last week, whilst the Scottish Government strongly support the principle of legislating to criminalise those who purchase sex, we retain a neutral stance on the prostitution bill. It is clear that a number of stakeholders have voiced concerns about the safety of women, and it is paramount that legislation put forward to this Parliament must be safe for women involved in and exiting prostitution and recognise online exploitation. This is paramount alongside a number of other issues within the bill that the committee has heard about and must be addressed by the member in charge of this bill is to have the confidence of Parliament. I assure Ruth Maguire of the sustained and detailed attention and engagement of the Government in taking forward this legislation and contributing to the discussion about addressing these issues.
Ash Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. One of the only areas of gender-based violence that is condoned currently by the Scottish Government is the violence of prostitution. Now, I welcome the Government's support for the qualified support for the principle of my unbuyable bill, which will give police the powers that they need to close this gap in the law. But will the First Minister meet with me and a group of survivors so that he can hear firsthand the horrible realities of prostitution?
First Minister.
As Ash Regan properly sets out, the Government is engaging constructively on this bill. I'll be very happy for the Minister responsible to engage with Ash Regan and with others on this bill. But there are, as I said in my response to Ruth Maguire, and I say this out of a desire to be helpful in this respect, there are challenging issues within the bill that we have to address properly to make sure the legislation can be applied, and that will be the process the Government will engage in.
Question number 6, Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the First Minister, in light of ExxonMobil's announcement of the closure of the Mossmorton ethylene plant, what action the Scottish Government is taking to mitigate any damage this will cause to the Cowdenbeath area and to the wider Scottish economy?
First Minister.
President, I want to reiterate my deep disappointment and concern at this decision and assure the workforce at the Fife ethylene plant that the Scottish Government is committed to doing whatever it can to safeguard the jobs there and secure an industrial future for the site. The Deputy First Minister has engaged extensively with all those with an interest in supporting the workforce and the local economy at Mossmorton, including the trade unions, workforce representatives, Fife Council and the United Kingdom Government, which holds the levers for an industrial intervention of the scale that we have seen in England and Wales. We have also joined partners, including Fife Council, in calling for a pause to the closure to ensure that all options to secure the industrial future of the site have been exhausted. And I welcome the participation of Mr Rowley in the discussions on Monday.
Alec Rowley.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, I would want to acknowledge the hard work and professionalism shown by the Deputy First Minister in mobilising the key stakeholders that will be required to begin to deal with the impact of this announcement. I attended a meeting on Tuesday at Fife College where ExxonMobil were very clear that the feed to the site will be shut off in February and that the closure will go ahead as announced. So can I ask the First Minister, where Fife Council will chair the task force that has been set up, does he acknowledge that if we are to achieve a new industrial future at Mossmorton, creating significant opportunities in skills and employment, then the Scottish Government will have to play a major role in coordinating that response? And does the First Minister accept that in order to address the impact of the closure, we must see substantial investment from both the UK and Scottish Government?
First Minister.
First of all, President Officer, let me correct the fact I referred to Monday when in fact the meeting was on Tuesday. But regardless, I welcome Mr Rowley's participation in that discussion. Let me confirm to Mr Rowley that the Scottish Government will be an active and critical player in the response in Mossmorton. We will engage, as Mr Rowley and I have worked together long enough to remember engagements previously on issues in relation to previous industrial closures in the Fife communities that he has championed, and we will do that again in this case and work collaboratively with Fife Council. Obviously, Scottish Enterprise have a lot to contribute to this process, with many projects emerging out of the work that's been undertaken on a preparatory basis in Grangemouth. That full intelligence will be available to the group in Mossmorton, and I obviously recognise that there will be resource implications of all that's involved, which the Government will consider as part of our budget process.
Thank you. Move to constituency and general supplementaries. Concise questions. Give more members concise questions and responses. Give more members a chance to take part. I call Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Whisky Association has warned that the Chancellor's decision to further increase duty on the Scotch whisky will put additional pressure on a sector already suffering job losses, stalled investment and business closures. Does the First Minister agree that this was the wrong decision, given the challenges facing the industry, and can he highlight what the Scottish Government is doing to support the sector?
First Minister.
President Officer, the issues that Mr MacDonald raises are very important and significant, and the disparity in alcohol duty that should have been addressed in the budget went unheard. There is now going to be a rise in duty rates of 18% in 3 years. This is an important sector to the Scottish economy, and obviously, as Mr MacDonald will be aware, I've worked assiduously over the summer to try to ensure that one of the other issues that presents challenges to the Scotch whisky industry, which is the tariffs applied by the United States, were to be resolved. I await the outcome of the United Kingdom Government's approach on this question, and I am becoming increasingly concerned that no solution has been offered, despite the hard work that has been put in on this issue. But I do recognise that the industry is operating in a very challenging environment, and the Scottish Government will support it in any way it can.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, Scottish sports governing bodies are collectively saying that they're increasingly unable to deliver core functions due to a continuing squeeze on their funding. Not only are increasing numbers of competitors being asked to pay for representing the country, projects designed to increase participation opportunities, reaching out into our communities, especially in the most deprived areas, are being cut. First Minister, there is much talk of improving the nation's health through early intervention and prevention. Surely physical activity is the very essence of improving physical and mental health. So can I ask if it is the intention of the Scottish Government to honour their manifesto pledge from 2021 to double the sports budget by the end of this parliamentary term?
First Minister.
So I've received correspondence from a number of sports organisations on this important question, and I acknowledge the centrality of the points that Mr Whittle makes and the necessity for investment, and the Government is investing in the sport and active living budget £46.43 million. And we're obviously operating in constrained financial circumstances, and we will do all that we can to boost the funding available for sport. I don't want to sour these exchanges, but I would point out to Mr Whittle that his party leader has just demanded that I use £150 million for a tax cut. Yeah. And Mr Whittle, Mr Whittle is shouting at me, spend to save. The money has to be available to spend in the first place. Absolutely. And that comes about by constructive engagement about the budget. And the Conservatives have voted against the budget last year. I don't know what they're going to do this year, but I do encourage Parliament to come to considered conclusions about the priorities in the budget, and the Government will be willing to engage with members on that question.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may be aware of the case of Leo Husman, who recently completed an optometry course at UHI. Leo is a British citizen who lived abroad with his family, but they were forced to flee to Scotland. But because they're British citizens, are not considered refugees. The Scottish Government allow universities to waive higher university fees for migrants and refugees who seek humanitarian protection. Leo has paid home tuition fees to UHI, but they're now asking for £23,000 as an overseas student in order that he can graduate. He's a job lined up and a supportive employer, but simply doesn't have £23,000. If he does not graduate, his 4 years in university will be totally worthless and his skills will be lost to Scotland. Leo has written to the First Minister, and I'm asking the First Minister today if he will intervene simply to allow Leo to graduate so that his qualification doesn't go to waste.
First Minister.
I haven't seen that correspondence yet, but I'll ask my office when I return there after First Minister's questions to put that to me. I'll look at that case and see it. Rhoda Grant makes a completely reasonable and understandable point. When I look at ophthalmology waiting lists, then more optometrists might actually be quite handy. So I'll have a look at the issue and do what I can to help.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, people across Aberdeen and the North East are worried about their jobs, their families and the future of their communities. Investment in the North Sea is at a record low, and a Robert Gordon University report states jobs are being lost at 1,000 a month. Despite the swathe of warnings from experts, Labour failed to scrap the energy profits levy this week and remained wedded to this tax on the North East. Does the First Minister share my concern that Labour's choices will cost jobs and drive a more rapid decline in the North Sea? And what steps will his government take to preserve skills, save jobs and ensure a truly just transition?
First Minister.
Sir, as I've indicated already, I'm deeply disappointed that the Energy Profits Levy remains in place. I think it is deeply damaging to the prospects of employment and opportunity in the north east of Scotland. The Scottish Government is putting in place support to the tune of more than £120 million invested in the north east through our Just Transition and Energy Transition Fund to support the region's transition, and we will continue to be steadfast supporters of that transition in the north east and supporting the communities as they face a very challenging situation that's been made worse by the preservation of the Energy Profits Levy.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, Forth Valley Health Ward Maternity Services at Larbert is the latest maternity service to receive a damning report from an unannounced inspection. The report highlighted that mothers were being put at serious risk and that some had to wait up to 62 hours to be induced. Therefore, what is the Scottish Government doing to ensure that lessons are learned from this report and that safeguards are put in place to protect mothers and their unborn babies as a matter of urgency?
First Minister.
The purpose of the review reports that have been done into every maternity service in the country is to make sure that these practices are actively challenged, so they can be improved. And that is what is underway. That's why Forth Valley has been inspected. It is, I think, the third inspection that has been undertaken. And if I look at the example in Tayside, which was the first investigation, many of the recommendations that have been made in relation to service in Tayside have now been implemented, and that will be the position in Forth Valley.
Jackie Bailey.
A report this week by Hospice UK found 2/3 of hospices in Scotland have made cuts or are planning to do so within the next year due to financial pressures. Every time there are salary rises in the NHS, hospice staff do not directly benefit, and therefore there are pressures on recruitment and retention. At the same time as the Scottish Government is considering the funding of proposals for assisted dying, can I ask the First Minister, does he share my view that we should assist hospices with funding of salaries to the same level as the NHS in future?
First Minister.
President Officer, on the question about hospice costs, I'm very sympathetic to this point. In July of this year, £5 million of funding was distributed to support independent hospices to deliver pay parity for clinical staff with their NHS counterparts. So that's the government intervening to do exactly that. Now, of course, what's difficult for hospices is when they get surprises, like employers' national insurance contribution increases, because that puts up the costs of employment. And Jackie Bailey raised with me the financial pressures, and that bluntly is where some of the financial pressures are coming from. Now, I very much want to do all that we can to support the hospice movement. I have enormous respect for the movement. I think the issues in relation to hospice care and palliative care are central to the human rights of individuals in our society. Jackie Bailey knows that my public position, this is a personal position, it's not the government's position. I am opposed to the assisted dying legislation, and I don't think it's appropriate for the issues of palliative care and assisted dying to be in any way connected. I think they are very separate issues, because the rights to palliative care for individuals in our society are absolute, and we should do all we can to support the sector, and the government will do all that it can in that respect.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Monday is World AIDS Day, and despite huge progress across the world in the development of treatments to prevent and manage HIV, we cannot fully rest in our efforts until a permanent vaccine is universally available across the world. Scotland has, of course, signed up to the ambition to eliminate all new cases of HIV by 2030, and I'm pleased to say that we are making very good progress on that, but it is that last cohort of people living with HIV with complex cases who will be both the hardest to find but also to treat, First Minister. So can I ask if the Government is fully committed to further rolling out opt-out testing for HIV, universal access to PrEP in Scotland, but also recommit his government to that shared ambition that Scotland can and probably should become the first place in the world to eradicate all new cases in the next 4 years?
First Minister.
I welcome Mr Green's question, and I warmly recommit the Government to that objective by 2030. The operational plans that are being delivered to achieve that are, as I think Mr Green fairly states are on track. There is good progress that is being made, but we have to sustain that focus to make sure that we can achieve that objective. I think it is part of a global effort, and we only succeed in global efforts if we start here and addressing the issues here. The one other factor I would add is that we also must tackle stigma, because there is still too much stigma around HIV, and as a tolerant, respectful and courteous society, we should do all that we can to eliminate the stigma around HIV as we work together to achieve the objectives that Mr Green has put to me today.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Jackson Carlaw, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.
Thank you. Could I please ask our guests who are leaving the chamber in the gallery, who have been most welcome to attend our Parliament, your Parliament, to do so quickly and quietly, because in fact we're about to go into the next item of business and we need some quiet for that. Thank you very much for your cooperation. So, in fact, the next item of business is a member's business debate on motion 19510 in the name of Jackson Carlaw on Glasgow City Council's plans for an at-city boundary congestion charge and a toll on using the Clyde Tunnel. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jackson Carlaw to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank those members who have been generous enough to lend their support to my motion today, and can I say how delighted I am to see Fiona Hislop in her chair to respond to it today, because I hope this will give her the opportunity for redemption, to redeem herself after the casual way she brushed aside my inquiry, which is the direct reason why this debate has been tabled today. When I asked her about this just a few weeks ago, and she said, I think, words to the effect that the Tories are in favour of localism, this was nothing to do with her, and washed her hands of the whole affair. And I hope that's not going to be her attitude today. Well, in some ways, maybe I should hope that will be her attitude today, because it has so offended all of my constituents in Eastwood that it's done wonders for my re-election prospects next May. And I don't know, maybe that was her intention, and if it was, well, of course I will be eternally grateful. But I would far rather she called out the reckless disregard for the damage that her colleagues in SNP-led Glasgow City Council could be wreaking upon the public by pursuing this policy, and also that she will give proper consideration to the wider long-term consequences that may follow as a result of this action were other councils to follow suit. Because what Glasgow have proposed is not, as some people have now got used to, a charge for LEZ for heavy fuel inefficient vehicles. They are talking about an at-city boundary congestion charge. They are asking constituents, not just from my local authority, but from all the neighbouring local authorities, to flash their digital passports as they seek to cross the city boundary into Glasgow. Those people who are attending healthcare appointments at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Those people who are going to work in the city. Those people are hoping to bring some sort of income into the city. And in my case, those people who are crossing the road, potentially, or just up the street to get to Sainsbury's, to get their shop, will now have to pay a boundary charge for the privilege of having done so. People in East Renfrewshire, in Renfrewshire, in Western Bartonshire, in North Lanarkshire and in South Lanarkshire are those who are most likely to be the those who are heaviest impacted. However, the charge would apply to every person in Scotland, every person who does not live in Glasgow when they cross the council boundary, i.e. a driver who is resident in the Borders or Dumfries and Galloway councils would be charged for entering Glasgow when they crossed into the city from one of the neighbouring local authorities. Drivers who are resident in one of the other 31 local authorities would be charged for every car journey to Glasgow, including for work, as I said, for healthcare, as I said, for education or for social and family reasons, while Glasgow residents would be exempt. Presiding Officer, what have people had to say about this prospective charge? The Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce has said we cannot support a citywide congestion charge, particularly until improvements in public transport have been made, which was his reason for objecting it.